So, there we go. So, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sharon. I'm one of the safeguarding advisors from the Diocese of Ely. There are a couple of other safeguarding team members also present today, Rebecca and Sarah, so welcome to those. I'm going to do some general housekeeping before I welcome our very experienced host of this morning's session. So, as I said, thank you so much for joining this webinar, which is part of the Cathedral and Diocese of Ely support for Safeguarding Sunday, which will take place this weekend. Hopefully you've all seen the numerous social media and advertising that we've done in relation to launching our Safeguarding Week, which we started with a number of events beginning on Monday at the Cathedral. Today is our third webinar of presentations ending on Friday. If you haven't had an opportunity to look at those other webinars, there are 4 remaining. So there's one this afternoon on hate, crime and awareness. There's 2 tomorrow, one at 10 o'clock in relation to working together. Then at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, we have a theology of safeguarding. Then on Friday morning, we have a 10 a.m. presentation in relation to modern slavery and exploitation, and ending with the final webinar on Friday afternoon in relation to spiritual abuse. It is definitely not too late to sign up if you've suddenly had some cancellations and you have capacity to join any of those. They continue to be free webinars, so please do go on the Diocese of Ely website and join and register. It literally takes a couple of minutes. We thank everybody's support for and contributions as part of our Safeguarding Week. Today's session is in relation to survivors' voices. We've allowed an hour and a half for the session, with the main part accommodating the presenter's presentation, and then there will be time and opportunity for questions, comments, contributions. We're going to do that via our Q&A little icon that hopefully you can see at the bottom of your screens. Throughout the presentation, I will be monitoring that. So anything that you would like to contribute, please use that icon, and then I will feed that into the main presentation and make our facilitator aware of that. What I would like to start with is that when we participate in training, we all bring and have very different reasons and experiences for joining, and that can be both personally and professionally. So it is absolutely key and really important that we look after ourselves during any training, and particularly during our session today. Whilst it is certainly not our intention to make anyone feel uncomfortable or upset with any of today's subject or material, sometimes information, conversations, questions can unexpectedly trigger, catch us off guard, and sometimes we can react to those in a way that we hadn't planned or participated or thought about. So if for any reason during or after the webinar today you have anything that has been triggering, you would like any kind of support or just a conversation, just someone to listen to, please do not hesitate to contact any of the team members at the Diocese Safeguarding Team. All our contact numbers and emails and mobiles are on our website. And also, please do take the time to have a look at our Diocese of Ely designated resource page for care and support resources and information. We obviously, myself and the facilitator, we are on loud, so hopefully we've got our phones on silent, but sometimes doors can knock and we may need to step away. Please bear with us, we'll come back. And so with everyone's permission, we are absolutely thrilled to introduce our expert speaker today in relation to survivors' voices. Her name is Jane Chevous. We're just absolutely thrilled. So Jane has a whole host of experience, both personally and professionally. She's a writer, activist, researcher, educator, and she uses both her lived and professional experience to lead on the Survivors' Voice organisation. Jane's background is huge. She is a qualified youth and community worker, social worker. She's been a teacher and continues to teach in a whole host of statutory, voluntary and faith sectors. I don't know how she's found the time, but she's also recently completed her MSc in mental health recovery and social inclusion. And then in addition to that, Jane is also one of the survivor representatives on the National Safeguarding Board. Jane, we are absolutely thrilled to welcome you today. I had the pleasure of spending some time with you on Monday. So with your permission and without further ado, I will now hand you over to Jane. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I hope I can live up to it. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'll say a little bit about our organisation. We're always welcome opportunities to share from our experience as survivors with others, allies and professionals and other survivors and just concerned friends and families who want to try and do something about the kind of endemic really of child abuse that we're beginning to understand is a global issue, and to look at how we can respond better to people who've experienced abuse. So Survivors' Voices is an entirely survivor-led organisation, and we actually began, some of you may be familiar with the Christian sort of arts and action festival Greenbelt that meets every summer bank holiday, and we began at a workshop for survivors in Greenbelt in 2001 when many of us shared the space and found for the first time somewhere we could have a voice with people who heard and understood us, and from that we grew to running activities, not just firstly at Greenbelt and then all around the UK. As a small grassroots organisation, we've never had core funding or an office. We're just a whole network of survivors who do this from our kitchen tables. Some of we basically talk about what we're doing as turning the pain of the abuse that we've all experienced into the power to make changes. So I'm very pleased to welcome you into this space where we'll explore what that means around recognising and disclosing abuse. The activities that we do now, we run peer support groups, both online and an in-person group in London, and occasional national meetings by and for survivors. We undertake survivor-led research, collaborating particularly with the Violence and Mental Health Network, based at King's College London, and other academics on some research projects around abuse and violence and mental health. We use what we learn from our peer support groups and our research to create educational opportunities like this, which we share with individuals and other organisations, not just in the faith sector, but also in health, in mental health, in schools, in colleges, anywhere that will have us really. We undertake activism that brings the voice of survivors to the public arena. So my colleague Antonia was the person who brought Loud Fence, which is, we're really excited at Ely of hosting a Loud Fence this week. She brought Loud Fence to the UK, and there's lots more information about that at Ely Cathedral and on our website. And we have particular relationships with faith communities. So because I'm a survivor of abuse in the Church of England, I do some work with the Church of England as a member of the National Safeguarding Panel, and on some of the other consultations with survivors. And we run support groups specifically for survivors of church abuse. And we've also recently entered a partnership with the Catholic Reform Movement Root and Branch Synod. And in fact, we're doing a seminar with them tonight. So we're quite busy at the moment, but that's quite exciting because I think all these things are leading to change. And just to reiterate the importance of taking care of ourselves throughout this seminar and afterwards, it's really good to know there's all the support available from the diocese. And obviously you're also any survivors that are listening or that you know are welcome to contact us if you're interested in the peer support that we offer. And just to be clear that we work with survivors of all kinds of abuse, men, women, and all gender identities, and domestic abuse, child abuse, abuse suffered as an adult in any context. So all people are welcome to contact us. So what we're going to try and cover today, and I hope this can be a bit of a conversation, and that there'll be you're very welcome to ask questions and to make comments in the Q&A, and we'll pause at various points to have a look at those. But what the ELI team have asked me to look at is something around the experience of disclosing abuse from a survivor's perspective. And in that, to understand the kind of trauma responses that abuse creates, explore what do we mean by trauma, and how do we recognize that, because that can help us to recognize also when someone is experiencing abuse. And how do we create safe spaces for people who are being abused, and children and adults, to disclose what's happening to them. And on that, we'll have focus particularly on the importance of connection and co-regulation, and then a sort of overall perspective on recognising disclosure and responding well to victims and survivors. We use the terms a bit interchangeably, victim, survivors, and people who experience abuse, because they mean different things to different people. And some people like some terms, some people like others. So I'll probably use a mixture, but please take the term that you're comfortable with. So I'm going to start by thinking about, why do people disclose that they've been abused? And I want to encourage you to think about what it's like when you have a really important piece of news and you have that you're waiting for, and you have to wait a long time. Maybe you're trying to buy a house, maybe you're waiting to hear about a new job, maybe there's a significant anniversary coming up in your family. And think about those feelings of anticipation as you're waiting for something to happen. Because we know that most people who are abused wait a very long time before they disclose. So that moment of disclosing is really important. Disclosure can be one of the most terrifying things that we do as a survivor, and how we respond to survivors who are disclosing can make all the difference between someone feeling heard or feeling re-traumatized, between someone finding a voice or disappearing back into silence and secrecy. So thinking about disclosing and thinking about responding well when we suspect or we learn about abuse is a really important part of safeguarding. There's all sorts of reasons why, as a survivor, I might disclose my abuse. We'll come back a bit later to why I might not disclose it, but let's think first about why I might disclose it. So I might just want to stop the abuse happening because I'm still being abused. I might want some help to escape a dangerous situation. I might be concerned about protecting others. I might know that I need help and support to continue with my life or to escape from a difficult situation. I might feel really burdened by what has happened to me and just want somewhere to unburden myself. Abuse is really silencing and often takes place in secrecy. So a really big factor might just be to be heard. And I might not have thought beyond that. I just want someone to hear me. I don't even know what I want to happen. I might be very concerned to stop the person who abused me from abusing anybody else and to be held accountable for some kind of justice. I might just know that life as it is right now is unbearable and I want something to change, though I don't know what I want to change it into. I don't know how to change it, but I just know I want it to change. I might not even know. I might just feel this that I'm compelled to tell somebody, or it may be a mixture of all these things. And at different times, when I'm first thinking about disclosing, or when I move to disclose, or as disclosure happens, these things may change. I think it's really helpful to think about what are all the different reasons that someone might come to you and share that they were abused or that they're being abused, and important to gently explore that with the persons of what is it they hope, if they know what they hope to come out of disclosing. So disclosure isn't something that often happens actually while the abuse is taking place. At most a third, and probably less from what we can find from research, of child abuse victims actually disclose what's happened to them straight away. This is quite a very broad statistic, but one of the key studies, it's a longitudinal study, found that about half of victims wait before disclosing, which can be anything from 1 year to 50 years after the abuse starts. And nearly a third in that study never disclosed, and actually other studies suggest it's even higher than that. That was a global study, a study in the UK. One study in the UK found on average people disclosed 16 years after the abuse. Another study found it was 22 years. In all our years of survivors' voices, we've had people from the age of 16 to the age of 84 disclosing to us for the first time. So that's why I asked you to think about waiting, because most people who disclose to you are going to have waited a long time before they felt able to speak about what's happening to them. The same UK study found that even though people disclosed, it might be then a further gap of up to 12 years before they accessed any support. And when they did access support, they may not have presented as a survivor, so they may have gone to mental health services with depression or anxiety, and there's a real issue there in that only 19% of those who had tried to access support had actually been asked if they were being abused. So that's another thing to be really aware of, that somebody might be asking for support with what we'll explore later are the symptoms of trauma, but won't use the language of saying to you, I'm being abused and that's why I'm struggling with these issues in my life. But it's helpful to think to gently explore with people what is bringing them to speak with you if they're coming asking for help. So the message from survivors is that it's really important not just to wait for disclosure, but to learn how to notice the signs of abuse and ask safely. And we're not going to focus on that so much today. That's probably another seminar. But certainly what we will look at today is around what some of the signs are. So I wonder, I mean, we might like to pause and put some thoughts in the Q&A. I wonder what you think a survivor hopes for in the reaction from somebody if they come and start to say to you, start to disclose to you that they're being abused. What kind of messages do you think they want to hear from you when they first disclose? What kind of things? What kind of response are they looking for?
Okay, so Maria has said, I think they hope to be believed. Paul has used the word empathy. Claire has mentioned about not feeling judged. Non-judgmental, lots of words coming in. Empathy again. Importance of being listened to. Someone's contributed, I think they want to hear that they will be in a safe place and no one can hurt them again. Someone who is non-judgmental and totally on their side. That the situation will not run away from them, maintaining control.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. Sometimes we have a tendency, don't we, to take over someone's experience or journey. Not carrying it alone.
Yeah, those are all great responses. So we did some research with our members, and this is the list that we came up with. So let's see if I think we pretty much overlap. Oh, I missed a slide. So we'll come back to your answers in a minute. Let's have a look at this first. Why don't survivors disclose sooner, having looked at the length of time that it takes? So there's lots of different reasons. It may be as simple as, particularly if it's a child or a young person, that we don't realise that what we're experiencing is abuse. That would be true for me. I was also abused in my family, and as a child, and I had no idea that this isn't what happened in every family. Many of the survivors that I work with say the same. And one of the really important things that we do in the peer support groups is share some of that validation that what we went through wasn't normal, and understanding that it was actually abusive. Another reason we don't disclose is that we're scared of what will happen if everything changes, because even if it makes us unhappy, even if it causes us suffering, what we know can feel less scary than what we don't know. As you've signalled in your responses, we're really afraid that we won't be believed, and that's why being believed is really important. And that's because there has been in the past a lot of disbelief, particularly around children, and then certain groups within society, as we've seen with the experience around sexual exploitation, that some young people and some adults in terms of sexual crimes are seen labelled as incredible, or seen as having caused the abuse, and so they're not actually believed. We may have been threatened that if we tell anybody, something will happen to us, or something will happen to other people in our family. And with that, harm may have already happened that leads us to think that this is definitely true. We may be afraid about what happens. That again was picked up in one of your responses, that it doesn't all, we don't lose control of everything. You know, we as children particularly, we read about families being broken up, the child being taken into care rather than the abuser being removed, the abuser being sent to prison, and if the abuser is a member of your family, that's not what you necessarily want to see happen. Or we may be afraid that we're judged as somehow something's wrong with us. So that sense of shame and fear of society's judgment may stop us from telling. We may see that what happens to other victims who disclose isn't a positive experience. So, you know, we've seen in the sad and shameful history of the church that we haven't always responded well to survivors, and that can put people off from disclosing now. Or it may just all feel too painful. So moving on.
Jane, we've got a someone's just written something.
Yeah.
So Emma has shared, I think often with adults in part, they don't see the point in disclosing as the impact on them may be higher than the consequences to the abuser. I find people often come forward once they see that their abuser has been convicted for abuse on someone else, so that they can see there may be a point in coming forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, and it's really difficult, isn't it? Because you know, we know that it is difficult to, our systems are not well designed to hold people who abuse accountable, partly because the levels of evidence are really difficult in order to establish to the level of the criminal justice system that abuse has happened. And even when people might believe the survivor that something has happened, it can be very difficult to get a formal process that can respond well to that and hold people accountable. And you'll have seen, we've all seen people publicly complaining about the lack of accountability within institutions like the Church of England and like the Roman Catholic Church and like Jehovah's Witnesses for the adults who abuse, and for senior church leaders who have in the past covered up abuse. And, you know, I want to be honest and say that we haven't still got all that quite right. And that does make you hesitate to say to someone, you know, you should disclose this. And I think it's such a personal journey. I think it's important just to support people to think about what do they want to do and take it step by step, because the outcome of having a voice, even if there's no accountability, can for some people be the most important thing, and for other people not having accountability can be such a painful thing that they wish they hadn't disclosed. So it's a very personal journey and really hard for us if we're working in this area to navigate. Is that something else popped into the chat, Sharon? I'm not opening the chat box because it covers up the slides.
No, that's absolutely fine. So absolutely, following on from what you were just saying, contribution, recognition that so few abusers of children are not convicted or even taken to court, as the level of evidence is difficult to substantiate, very hard for survivors. Also thinking with COVID, just the actual delay in cases being presented, you know, can be a whole nother level of trauma. Emma's written, police in my area told me yesterday that unfortunately they don't have a designated team for historic abuse, and so they have to prioritise current abuse. And so victims who come forward regarding past abuse are often having to wait a long time for any results. Absolutely, Emma. Expectations thresholds and resources we know are hugely, unfortunately, influential in services.
Yeah, and definitely we know that they're under particular strain at the moment, and so I think that's really important what you're raising, Emma, that we are realistic with people about what to expect, and don't promise that it will all be wonderful if you do disclose and if you go forward with formal reporting. You know, not to say it will be dreadful, but not to promise what can't be delivered, and it does vary from area to area. So again, if you know, for professionals, it's really important to network, I think, in your local area and see, so you've got a good idea of what is possible in your area, and for all of us to keep lobbying agencies and the government to put adequate resources into this.
Thank you. I think that's it on the questions at the moment, Jane.
Okay. So back to, sorry, I skipped my slide, didn't I? Back to what is it that victims and survivors need to hear when they disclose, and I think you covered most of these. I believe you is really important, and we've talked about that, and I'm glad you told me. We're often very fearful of the reaction of people that we tell, that they'll be shocked, or they'll be disgusted, or they won't want to hear it. I'm sorry that happened to you, because even if we can't fix it now, just actually acknowledging that it was a horrible thing to happen, and it shouldn't have happened. It wasn't your fault, because so many of us believe that it was our fault in some way, and of course it wasn't. You know, my business started when I was very little. There's no way that I was responsible for that happening, but the narrative in my family made me feel like I was responsible, made me believe I was responsible, and that's true of many survivors. We end up thinking it's our fault, or we're told it's our fault. How can I support you, rather than thinking that we know what somebody needs, because we're each different and we all need different things? I'm here for you. I think somebody said that, but somebody to walk with you, some solidarity, that you're not just going to hear a disclosure, pass it on and disappear, is really important. And explaining within the context of your role and your relationship what the boundaries are of confidentiality. So for most of us, it will be, I will have to share this, and explaining who to share it with and when and how, and as much as possible giving the survivor the lead and the choice in that, if they wish it. We asked, as part of a research project we're doing with actually the National Safeguarding team around the quality standards for safeguarding in the Church of England, we asked survivors what is it they'd like someone to say during a disclosure conversation, and these are direct quotes of how people responded in our research. And this is not to present it as a formula, because again, it's more important that we're ourselves, that we're natural and just bring our own perspectives and compassion to a conversation, but just some indication of the kind of things that different survivors said they felt would be helpful for them. And obviously what's helpful for one may not necessarily be helpful for all, but these are some of the things that they suggested. That must have been terrible for you. I'm so sorry that it happened. We will be with you as this unfolds. You will be heard. Please tell me more if you'd like to. I'm so sorry. Let's have a cuppa. I'll put the kettle on. You can tell me all about it. I don't find that hard to believe. I do believe you. It's really helpful to hear your story. Take your time. It's okay. I'm here. And how can I help you? Wonder if there are other things that you think it would be helpful to say, and we'll just pause there and invite any other suggestions in the Q&A.
think sometimes, Jane, as well, we worry, don't we, about getting it wrong. We kind of don't see ourselves as experts or think we've not got the skills to this, but it's about recognizing the value, isn't it, of just your skill as listening, offering someone that space and opportunity, and actually that in itself is kind of an intervention, a supportive intervention right at the beginning. I'll just check the chat. I've got no current comments or questions, but I'll keep an eye on it, Jane.
Okay. So the last thing I want to say at this point about disclosure is to think about, to recognise that it's a journey, not a one-off thing that happens. So the first conversation may be just to kind of feeling the way towards, are you the right person for me to talk to? Are you going to be sympathetic in how you respond to me? Do I trust you enough to say something to you? Do I trust enough that you're going to respond well? And or maybe I'm just so desperate that I don't even need to know whether I trust you, but are you prepared to listen? So all of those things that are going on in somebody's mind before they might start having a conversation about abuse. And also that the first conversation may just be a hint of what's going to come out later on. And one of the things I think is actually quite difficult for our processes to manage, because it's the length of time that it takes is quite unpredictable, is recognizing that disclosure kind of happens over a series of conversations and is a bit of a journey. And that we might even only remember ourselves, because of the nature of traumatic memories, the first part of what we want to disclose, if when it isn't something that's happened recently. And then as we disclose a bit more and as things happen, something else may bubble up. And so there's the next bit of the disclosure. And I think that's quite a difficult thing to manage when we have processes that say there's only certain people you speak to, and it's really important that only people who are appropriately trained, ask questions about the abuse. And so disclosure, if you're the first person, you're just someone in the parish who, or a friend who's receiving a first disclosure, and you have to pass it on to the safeguarding team, it can be quite difficult for the survivor to know where that journey is going to go, and quite difficult for when we're the listener to understand that this is just part of a journey, and to support the person through that journey. I can see a couple of things popped up in the chat there. Sorry, is there anything to deal with right now?
So Emma has her can you hear me? So yeah. Emma has said you do have control. So thinking about how you can respond, you do have control in this situation. Saying to the person, I'm not going to run off and do things without discussing each steps as we go along. And Jane has just asked, why would you say tell me more, which I think was the third one down on the slide, Jane.
So I think the survivors who were this is a sort of distillation of a number of suggestions from survivors. Those were saying, tell me more, were recognizing that they might have just said a very little bit at the beginning of a conversation, and wanted to know that it was welcome to carry on speaking. So I might have come up and said, I'm just struggling a bit at the moment. And then like, oh, I don't know how to get to the next bit and tell you what I'm struggling with or how I'm feeling or what it is. So a kind of invitation is, okay, I'm here, I'm willing to learn more. That kind of scenario. But you're right to raise it, because it's important also to be aware that we have to be careful not to ask direct questions that could be seen as leading someone down a particular path. We have to be really careful that we're not asking questions that could cause problems in a criminal investigation further down the line. So it's an open question. Would you like to tell me more? rather than tell me about this, or did they do that? Those kind of closed questions could be difficult. So the other thing that I want to move on to think about now is how is trauma showing up in these conversations? And that might actually help us to recognise abuse when there isn't such a clear-cut disclosure. So again, I'd like to invite you to put, this is something we've done with survivors, and I'm going to share their words in a minute, but I'd like to invite you to think about how would you sum up trauma in 3 words, and if you'd like to write your 3 words in the Q&A. And Sharon, I'll ask you to read them out.
Absolutely. Would you like me to just read them out as they come in, Jane?
Yeah, let's do that.
It's very quiet in the question Q&As. Hopefully everybody's okay. Brilliant. Here comes some words. Thank you, everybody. So some of the words coming in, Jane: anger, quietness, misbehaviour, pain, fear and panic, shock, paralysis and numb, those debilitating, humiliating, anxiety, frightening, overwhelming, helpless, upset, anxiety, shock, harm, damage, hurt, shattering, brokenness, abandonment, broken, sad, wrong, tearful, unable to speak clearly. They're the ones that have just come in. Thank you, everybody. Some really powerful words. Here comes some more: offence, shock, assault, harmful, negative, distressing.
They're really powerful words.
Some really, really powerful words. I think that's it at the moment, Jane, but I will continue to keep an eye.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to sort of think a little bit about how what we observe and what's going on underneath maybe 2 different things, but one can lead us to recognise the other. What do we actually mean by trauma? We kind of bandy around the words trauma and abuse. What do we actually mean? Andrew Sweeney and Russo in their collection of edited articles by people with lived experience in the MAD studies field, define trauma as something that happened to you that still haunts you today. And if it doesn't still haunt you, it sure did for a long, long time. And I think all the survivors I know would agree with that. This is something that lives with many of us, perhaps for the whole of our lives at different levels and in different ways. The actual...
sorry, I had a couple more, Jane.
Yeah.
Unexpected, life-shattering, anger, quietness, misbehaviour, confusing, never-ending and alone.
Yeah, again, I think that's a couple of times behaviour has come up, and I think that's a really important thing that we'll come back to, about what we see on the outside is a clue to what's happening inside, and it's important that we don't just react to what we see on the outside. So the parameters of trauma, because we sometimes talk about something being traumatic that maybe isn't such a dangerous event, but generally the parameters of trauma within the mental health world and within social care, is that it's any experience that is stressful enough to leave us feeling helpless, frightened, overwhelmed, or profoundly unsafe. And I think focusing on those feelings is really important if we're working particularly with children and young people, in recognizing trauma. Because if you'd asked me as a child, was I being abused? I'd have said no, because I had no concept of what that word meant. But if you asked me, where do I feel safe and where do I feel unsafe, and when do I feel frightened, and who am I frightened of, I could have told you all those things. So someone might have recognized what was happening if the signs of trauma rather than the specifics of abuse or what had been explored with me. So now in mental health, it's kind of recognized that what we need to ask is what happened to you, not what is wrong with you. And Gabor Mate gives a really helpful definition that trauma isn't just what happened to you, but it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. So trauma is like the wound that you carry from the abuse. He talks about trauma as being the scarring that makes you less flexible, more rigid, less feeling, and more defended. So as you've really shown very well in the list of words that you come up with, what we see when we're working with people who are carrying trauma and what is hidden underneath can be quite different things. What we might see is someone who's angry or distressed, and what might be hidden underneath are some of those other words about fear and overwhelm and depression. And we asked survivors to make their list of 3 words. We've turned that into an animation, and I'm going to share that with you now. And again, it's a very powerful animation, so just to be prepared for that.
Some really powerful words. So just before we move on, I just want to pause and take a moment to reflect on how does it impact us to meet someone who's carrying that kind of trauma? What kind of feelings? Thinking of your own words and seeing those words and thinking about meeting somebody who's experiencing that. What kind of feelings does that bring up in you? And if you wish to, maybe sharing them in the Q&A.
So someone's written, so emotional seeing all those words, having experience of young children's abuse makes me feel so sad.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's another one. Feeling like what we do to help can be a drop in the ocean as the cycles of abuse is never ending.
Yeah, so I just want to acknowledge that these are huge. This is a huge topic. This is a deep thing, and it impacts us a lot. And being aware of the impact on us is a really important part of how we can respond well and safely and helpfully when we meet trauma. But also, you'll have seen there's some in there that people were talking about how they've come through trauma and survived it. And we fundamentally believe in survivors' voices, that it is possible to transform trauma into healing. And it's a slightly contentious word, but recovery, whatever that means for you. And it's a journey, not a place you arrive at, but we definitely believe that that's possible. And that's what we want to move on to think a little bit about now. So where do we connect with trauma? In order to answer that, it's helpful to think about how trauma is something that's not just emotional, it's physical and it's embodied, and it affects every part of ourselves, our nervous system, and our brain. And you're probably all familiar with this. But the idea that trauma triggers particular reactions in us. And I quite like using the concept of the trauma traffic lights to remember that. When life is okay and we're not carrying lots of trauma and we're feeling safe, then we're at the green space of being sociable, and it's our happy place. And we all hope that that's where we'll be. But most of the time, obviously, there's always challenges and difficult things in life, but that we can stabilize and feel okay. When we sense a threat, our autonomic nervous system is triggered, and that's the fight flight instinct that we're probably all familiar with. And then more recently, people are recognizing there's also what's sometimes called the fawn. I'm not particularly fond of that word, but the submissive response, and that is probably more common than we've previously recognized. But in a sense, we're on the amber alert. We're ready
to react. And then if what the trigger takes us back to a place, or we're in a place that's life-threatening and overwhelming, then our very, very primitive freeze or shutdown response can be triggered, and that can be what we might recognize as the rabbit in the headlights freezing response, or the total reptilian close down and appear as dead. And the thing with trauma is that those reactions can be triggered by small things that are echoes of the abusive experience, but the reaction that we have now is as great as though we were still back in the place when the abuse happened. And an example of that, to show you how small a thing the trigger can be, is one of our colleagues in Survivor's Voices. Her trigger is someone eating an apple, so it has a particular association with her abuser. And if she hears someone eating a crunchy apple, she is triggered immediately into the fight-flight instinct. And one of the things to understand is that it can feel like it's not just you're looking back to something that happens in the past, but a trigger can lead you to experience the same abuse all over again. So when we're holding safe, when we're trying to respond well and connecting with someone experiencing this kind of trauma, it's helpful to think about what we're seeing and what we're experiencing in terms of where the person is on those traffic lights, and also how that's impacting us where we are on our traffic lights. And how can we try and move up to the okay, safe space. And it's Winnicott that talks about holding space for people. And I think that's a really important message, that holding space in itself is an incredibly powerful and important response to trauma. We don't have to come with answers and solutions, and actually there are no simple answers and solutions. Helen Bamber, who worked with torture victims, talked about the importance of receiving horror and not recoiling from it. Again, this is something that's echoed time and again in our peer support groups, that it's such a healing and empowering thing to be with people who receive us and our trauma and our stories with attentiveness and compassion, without running away, diminishing, disbelieving, or denying what's happened to us. So doing that may seem like someone saying a drop in the ocean, but actually it has a huge impact. And I think that's the very first important thing we can do in response. And the second thing we can do is think about, how do I connect? So trauma happens in relationships. There may be forced relationships, or there may be long, ongoing relationships. But it happens between two people. And where most trauma happens in the family, so it happens within family relationships, and the abuse ruptures that relationship. And because the rupture is experienced in every aspect of ourselves, like we spoke about, then we also need to experience the way to repair from that rupture in every aspect of ourselves. So recovering from trauma, abuse and trauma, has to happen in relational ways, we believe, and we experience. And so as somebody responding well, the fact that we pay attention to the relationships with the person who we're supporting is again the fundamental importance. And we always start everything that we do in Survivors' Voices with relationship. And then the third thing I'd like to suggest that is really helpful in responding is to think about how we regulate ourselves in terms of not being triggered and not being moving down that trauma traffic lights, because again, all the what we've learned about trauma in recent years is that when we're regulated, we can help to regulate somebody that we're with. So our bodies, as well as our emotions, and our work through co-regulation. So actually knowing, recognizing, that's why we paused and thought about what was the impact of seeing those words that survivors used to describe trauma, recognizing the impact on ourselves and doing what we need to take care of ourselves means that we're better able to support and help survivors. So I'm going to suggest a few things that we can do that are regulating and support co-regulation, and again invite any of you to suggest things that you think are helpful in the Q&A. So some of the things that we find that we practice in survivors' voices that are helpful are thinking about basic grounding techniques like breathing and breathing slowly and being aware of our breathing. A second thing that we think is really helpful is validating people's experiences. So not trying to fix them or move on from what people are experiencing or expressing, but just validating what they're saying. Thinking about how we can be a safe container for the strong emotions and perhaps overwhelming emotions that people are bringing. So how can we create a safe space? And that goes back to the things like, very simple things like that, what to say to someone. Let's put the kettle on, have a cup of tea, a bit of safety, a bit of breathing space. Recognizing our own need for self-care and learning, making sure that we're caring for ourselves, and then perhaps supporting survivors to think about how they can practice self-care and self-soothing. So those are some of the suggestions from our peer support groups, and I just want to pause there and see if any of you have any other things that you'd like to suggest, any other strategies.
Okay, Jane, so someone's written engaging in supervision.
Yeah, that's really important. So if you think of more, please do pop some in the Q&A. But I'll move on just to the last section, so there's time for any further questions at the end. So just thinking about what do we do, what are survivors asking us to do once we've had a disclosure? And I don't mean the kind of formal processes, because I'm sure you're all aware of those and have been to safeguarding training. But more what good, again, I think somebody wrote in one of the beginning Q&As about what the longer term response is. So the survivors in our research with church abuse survivors said, and so the next few slides are quotes from survivors, mainly quotes, that the church needs to understand trauma and why we are disclosing, and coming back to what we were saying before, that there may be many different reasons. Do we want pastoral care or counselling? Do we want support to heal our wounded heart? Or do we want investigation? One survivor said, when someone discloses abuse, the person should be patient and understanding. Often you just want someone to listen to you and accept you, to tell you that what you are experiencing is wrong and that you are of worth and value. People get scared because they think that you want them to solve the situation and that this is beyond them. But often you just want someone to listen and accept you. Another survivor said, our comprehension of what happened shifts and changes over time. Don't immediately, on first reporting, shuttle us into a system where everything is taken out of our hands. It's got to be reported and escalated into the legal system when we're still trying to understand what the hell has happened to us and how it has happened. And I think somebody said at the beginning that it's always possible to take some, it's nearly always possible. Someone's in immediate extreme danger, it may not be, but it's nearly always possible to walk with somebody into the more formal processes in a way that leaves them as much agency and control as possible. We did some research in the summer around children and young people who've been abused at home and never knew what had happened. And again, these are quotes from the survivors that took part in that, who were saying that the most important thing was they wanted people to help them find safety, they wanted to be seen, they wanted to be heard, in control and supported. And they wrote some messages to survivors, which is what we're going to we have up here, saying, you do not deserve this, no matter what anyone says or does. No one deserves to be hurt and scared. Please know that you have so much to offer and this is so unfair, but I hope you can find the strength to be kind to yourself and trust yourself. You might need to do things to keep yourself safe at this time. Whatever you need to do is okay and not your fault. Know that you are not alone. So the final question I want to ask you, invite you to put in the Q&A, is the survivors in this research were talking about needing hope, help and healing. And I wonder if you have ideas of what you think might bring hope to a survivor. Or a message of hope that you might want to share with a survivor.
Okay, we've got some coming in now. So one line is the potential for recovery, always there for them. Let them know that you are not alone. I am here for you. The journey is taking a new direction. Things can change and support is available. Safe accommodation. I think the hope is in part a recognition that trying to forget is an unachievable goal, but you can still thrive. You are more than what happened to you. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really important. We can't wipe it out.
You are precious, loved and welcome here.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
evidence, including of ongoing impact of trauma.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. There's a very old poem by a Victorian missionary called "In Acceptance Findeth Peace." And I always have very mixed feelings about that, because I think it's true that if we fight something that we can't change, then we're always going to be in a difficult place of feeling at battle with life. But then there's some things we shouldn't have to accept, and I think it's a kind of fine line between accepting the things that we can't. It's a serenity prayer, isn't it? Accepting the things that we cannot change, but also looking for the things that we can change and working to change them. So a really interesting word, acceptance. So finally, just a couple of slides to think about. Is there something particular about the church's response to abuse, trauma? There is a kind of invitation to take part in the Loud Fence, which Ely Cathedral are hosting, but also to go to the seminar later today around a theology of trauma, and think about how our faith impacts the way we deal with trauma and the way we respond to survivors. And that picks up our theme of hope. So Judith Herman, in her book about trauma, which is probably the Bible of trauma, talks about the survivor's recovery is not based on the illusion that evil has been overcome, but rather on the knowledge that it has not prevailed, and on the hope that restorative love may still be found in the world. So actually the gospel of love, which is our belief if we're Christians, is key to responding from abuse and trauma. And I really hope that part of what we're doing in all the work that we're doing at the moment around safeguarding is recognizing that safeguarding is the heart of the calling of the church. And actually, if we can tackle the abuse within our churches and the trauma within our churches, we're modeling the goodness and the hope and the love that comes out from the gospel. And this was picked up by many of the people who've been working with the National Synod on behalf of survivors, as survivors themselves and of allies. And they took the text, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? And so sort of final question to you, for those of you who have a faith, might be to think about what is it in your faith that guides you in this kind of, and sustains you in this kind of work. And do feel free to again to make some suggestions in the Q&A, or to ask any final questions before our seminar ends. And I'm just going to leave a quote up on the screen from one of my favourite poets, Lem Sissay, which reminds us again about our incredible ability to heal. And thank you so much for listening. And yeah, please do share any comments or questions.
Okay, so some comments coming in. Emma, there are more people who care than those who do harm. We did have a question earlier, Jane, on whether your presentation is going to be available after today's webinar.
So I'm very happy to send you a copy of a PDF of the slides. Anyone's welcome to have that.
Thank you very much. Just want to give people a couple more minutes in case they do want to write anything. Just to reference, so the theology webinar that Jane just mentioned, that's tomorrow, so Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. So please do feel free to register as an attendee. As I said earlier, it's certainly not too late. So Sarah's written, I'm a true believer that everything happens for a reason, and as hard as things may be, a lot of good can come from people's experiences, often helping others.
Yeah, I think I said at the beginning that our kind of slogan is turning pain into power. Or actually, I should have said, shouldn't really say this on the recording, but the actual version, that's the sanitized version, the actual version which came out of one of our survivor researchers groups, is we're turning our shit into gold. Which I really like. But actually, we normally say turning our pain into power in case we shock people. And I think that's not a reason to celebrate the shit, is it? You know, no one wants to be in the shit, but absolutely to recognise there's something incredibly powerful and strengthening about using painful and difficult experiences to help, and motivating, you know, to help others. And you know, we quite often sit around saying the survivors that we've met are some of the most amazing people we've ever met, and that is a really hopeful thing. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
We've got lots and lots of thank you, Jane, including thank you so much, Jane. This was a wonderful and very helpful webinar. Healing is indeed possible, and it is a privilege and an honour to help survivors on this journey. Okay, so certainly we've just got one more comment. Another very grateful, thank you, Jane, for an excellent webinar, very helpful presentation. And certainly I would like to say on behalf of my safeguarding colleagues, the Cathedral and the Diocese of Ely, we are internally grateful, Jane, for dedicating, we know you're so busy, for both coming to the Cathedral on Monday and being with us all day and into the evening for evening song and for the parish safeguarding evening, and again for today, and taking time out of your diary and sharing what has been a very excellent and insightful webinar. And hopefully people will feel invigorated to go away and do some additional reading, and certainly look at the Survivors Voice website and contact you in the future. So yeah, comments are coming in, excellent, powerful webinar. So lots and lots of positives. Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you for everybody who has taken their time out of their very busy schedules and to join this webinar. Please do look after yourselves for the remainder of the day. Go and have a cup of tea and coffee and a stretch of your legs. And as I said earlier, if you want to have any conversation about anything in the context of safeguarding, please do not hesitate to contact any of the members of the safeguarding team. And as I said, there are lots of resources that we continue to add to on the Diocese of Ely website. So stay safe and well, everybody. in these very challenging and uncertain times, and take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening.